We are busy putting death out of business, and got Mr. Smith from Houston here. Before we cross over there, let's quickly thank our sponsors. Let's thank Thrivous, that's Geoprotectors and Nootropics, $5 all the way up to $160. And also, I am Transhuman, Dave Kelly. How are you, Mr. Smith, all the way from Houston? How's the weather?
Well, doing well. The weather today is really beautiful. It's a fantastic day. How about there?
Yes, very good. Actually, beautiful here, and it's unfortunate we're in lockdown. Lockdown is a really terrible scenario for the world to be in, especially when there's good weather outside. It seems like everybody wants to go out, even now they're not supposed to go out, which is pretty funny. It's like we always can't get what we want, you know. Normally people were inside avoiding the outdoors, and now everyone wants to go out. But I guess that's human nature to try and strive for what you can't really have. Is the same can be said there in Houston, Texas?
Yes, yeah, it's a kind of peer pressure, stay inside sort of thing. But we get all these very helpful messages on television, not to get around anyone. Everyone has to eat, so you go to the store and they've got us wearing masks now. We have to stand 6 feet apart, which now they're saying probably isn't far enough not to get it. So it's a very mysterious and strange, probably the strangest time in my life to be a part of this.
Yeah, social distancing is kind of odd. It's kind of strange. It's kind of strange to see like the White House, like everyone's social distancing. It's kind of weird to see. And all the concerts have shut down. Not that I went to concerts anyway, but it's kind of interesting to think about that. And it's just an interesting time, like you say. It's turned. What do you think this means for the future state of Texas? Do you think that eventually after the pandemic sort of slows, that they will let people go back to normal, or do you think this will permanently reshape how people think about life?
It's a good question. The realization I've had in the last couple of days is that we're told that this thing is incredibly contagious. I think in North Korea they said one person infected 1,000 people at one religious event. And I'm pretty sure that hasn't changed. It may have mutated a few times, but it's still incredibly contagious. And the whole message here is to, what do they say, smooth the curve? Or
flatten the curve.
Flatten the curve. But I kind of don't get that, because the one purpose of flattening the curve is we don't overwhelm the health care, the hospitals and whatnot. But as we all go back to our normal lives, which President Trump promised, it was just going to be a couple of weeks, and then it was Easter, which was yesterday, and then they said May. They say May or June, but he also said the beginning of the NFL season, which is September. Nothing so far that I have seen has substantially changed. So I imagine if we do start going back to work, we're just going to get infected. I mean, nothing's going to change about that. I'm hoping and praying that the medical people figure out how to treat this better. It's sort of a lottery thing. Obviously, if you're old and you have some problems, it's likely going to affect you horribly. But even fairly young people, one person gets it and they're asymptomatic, and other people get it and it's just the worst thing ever, and many die. So I don't. Nothing has really changed. It's possible the heat. But I saw in the Philippines, where it was a high of 94 degrees, it was spreading quite well. So I don't necessarily believe. Is it warm in Australia right now?
Up in the northern sections, it's fairly warm. It's getting colder here because we are moving towards autumn winter times. So opposite of you guys, I think. So you're moving towards spring, right? Or you're in spring or beginning of spring. But yeah, it's getting colder. So this is not a good time for us in terms of infections. But it's okay. Like, that's better probably in the southern hemisphere, because the population is a lot lower down here in the southern hemisphere, so it's probably better that the higher populated north, heads into a somewhat better time. It's just very weird. I remember like Shakespeare, having to shut up all the theaters and running away, and you think, oh, that's Mark Twain writing about the plague, and not play Twain, but all these people, and you're thinking, oh yeah, that's some ancient history stuff, but actually no, it's modern history, and it's happening here, and it's just kind of strange. We would have thought with preventative medicine, antibiotics, antivirals, vaccines, etc., that we would have been past this, but no, it seems to be having a profound impact. And it's if you I'm reading I read things like Defense Department documents and stuff, and like with quarantine ships and stuff, and it's impacting wars. I mean the Houthis and the Saudis have decided to draw up a ceasefire. They stopped fighting in Syria, so there must be something going on if they won't even be bothered to fight wars anymore. It's delaying defense contracts, so it's disrupting the Defense Department for defense contracts. So if that's the test, I think. If it's disrupting defense, if it's disrupting wars, there must be really something going on that's quite a shock to the system.
I agree, and one of the old ways of trying to figure out what's truly going on in the world is saying when an event happens, who does it benefit? Who comes out on top? And if you look at this thing, it doesn't appear to benefit anyone. Right. I obviously didn't benefit the Chinese. One of my arch enemies are the central bankers. I don't see how this is benefiting them. It really seems like a very bad cluster problem.
Yeah. I'm on board with you being arch enemies of central bankers. If you see behind me, that is the Federal Reserve building there. It's not here to. Yeah. Like you're a Ron Paul fan. I'm a Ron Paul fan. Ron Paul. Let's talk Ron Paul. Liberty man there from Texas. Congressman for a long time, on and off since the 70s. What do you think? What do you think about? Well, let's talk about the Ron Paul movement. When were you always a Ron Paul fan?
Yeah, I think as soon as I heard about him, I've been a friend of his for a long time, and a good friend of mine has been great friends with him for 30 years. So we've had a lot of time with him. We go to lunch or dinner with him, every couple of months. He is so unique. Again, I don't know how it is in Australia, but in the U.S., a very, very good person can run for Congress, win Congress, and probably within 90 to 120 days, it's over. For some reason, they get that kind of their royalty type of feeling. And for whatever reason, that didn't happen to Ron Paul. I don't think it's happened to his son, Rand Paul, who I also know. And there's another guy named Massey out of Kentucky. And they're literally, I've worked with a lot of politicians. They're literally the three that seem to maintain that humility and that sort of empathy for the average citizen. So, yeah, I think it's most citizens around the world have a target on their back. There's this enslavement mentality that they want to build slave farms. So you have this much hope, and you just keep working and working that you're gonna build something, but they don't allow you. They take your wages and they take your wealth. And of course, I love the name of your show, Debt Nation, because that's debt is everything. All money is debt, and debt runs the world. Debt is enslavement, and debt is power for the people that issue it. So.
Yeah, it's how modern civilization is constructed. It's run, it's built, it's financed. It led to the misallocation of all sorts of resources. The whole countries are built off, misallocated debt structures, and it's really messed our world up. And the thing is, those profits are essentially privatized through the Federal Reserve System being a private entity, going back to Jekyll Island and all of that. And it's not in the hands of the government, which is what the founders, and which is what a couple of American civil wars were over, to keep the private central banking cartel out of the United States. And since 1913, we've had the private central banks essentially privatize America, and that's what they're doing now. They're taking the S&P private. They're taking the Nasdaq private. They're taking the whole stock market, the whole of the capitalism right now as we speak. They're taking it all private, and that leaves America, which is the greatest beacon of liberty that the world has ever known. In a dangling by a thread, and it's unfortunate that this is happening.
Yeah, it's so bad. I mean, we're not really free as a nation by most measurements of freedom, and it's so. I mean, even most people like your age don't even understand what freedom is. They associate freedom with having a little money in their pocket or something. It's very it can be very concerning sometimes, some of the conversations that I have. Well, okay, so I've got a question for you. Do you think in any way that we're in the midst of a spiritual battle?
In what context?
Well, I've grown to look at what's happening in the world from a spiritual lens and saying, what's really going on here? And what is when someone makes a decision, does it have a spiritual component to it? And I think freedom is a very, very spiritual component. I think that and it says do you have an inalienable right to freedom? In our Constitution, inalienable is a God-given right. In other words, if you're born, it doesn't matter your physical condition, your sexual orientation, your gender, whatever. You have a God-given right to freedom. And we have a whole bunch of people in this world that want to take that freedom away, and some of them it's just an instinct. They think they're helping and they think they're super smart or whatever. But others, it seems like it kind of crosses over into an evil. They have an evil agenda. They more or less just don't even like people very much. So that's. I mean, do you think that's a possibility?
You've touched on some really good points here. So, in the context of liberty versus authority or authoritarian thinking, authoritarian thinking is probably the oldest type of thinking. It's very easy to go back through history and find the tyrants who enslaved the population. And if you want to think, and depending on how you think of God, I know you're in God-loving Texas over there in America, God as a historical figure, as a spiritual entity, is an authoritarian. Essentially, he's a one and only God who is kind of a benevolent authoritarian in a way, but he bestows a freedom onto people, and he's different from say Prometheus, who bestows tools as a revolutionary act onto the population. Which if I had to line up with a spiritual lens of thinking in terms of freedom, I would line up with Prometheus. I would say that by action of giving us tools to be free, be those intellectual tools, understanding of freedom, cultivating freedom, or technological tools, or etc. That Promethean idea is a spiritualist idea, but going back through history, unfortunately, what you find this dark side, which you're talking about, this sort of, you've got the Lion King, and you've got sort of the Lion King. His father was kind of standing up on the rock, and he was letting the people, like the animals, flock about the land and roam free and stuff. And occasionally he might eat the odd antelope or whatever, but that's whatever. He's a carnivore. But the other one, the bad one, what's his name? He was kind of authoritarian in terms of like a feudal lord. He would rule over the land, and he would get tribute from you'd use the hyenas as a mafioso type aggressor, and he'd take tribute. And that's kind of this feudalist idea of tyranny. And so I would say, in a spiritual sense, I would line up with the fact that of this Promethean idea that we've been bestowed with intellectual tools, with technological tools, with rights and liberties as a passage. If you want to take that even further, Mormons review that the freedom in that context is a brand new idea. As we said, going back through history, tyranny is actually the stock standard model, and America was set up as an anti-tyranny establishment. So, if you correlate tyranny being a historical model, you find that, tyranny and God and nation are three things that usually go pretty close in hand. They go close in hand whether you're talking about the empires of Europe. It's usually a monarch, a tyrannical idea, authoritarian idea, an empire or something. And that plays out. It's not until you really get to like the 1400s, with the age of exploration, that you find that there was a little bit more freedom in the fact that these explorers would, sort of break out of that model and try and discover the planet and map the planet. But it wasn't because they were free to do so. It was because they were searching for resources for the empire. Like ants would run around and explore and try and expand their territory and stuff. So are they really free? Well, they would argue that they're free, but they're free within a structure. I think America is unique in that way where God is not an authoritarian dictator who lords over you. He's got that. They've got that Protestant work ethic embedded in their history, but people were free to choose that. That was the whole religion idea. Right. It wasn't that you had to be Church of England or you had to be Catholic or something in America. You could choose to be the religion or not. It was a freedom structure that just happened to be the majority of the religion. So God wasn't an authoritarian, so to speak. So from a spiritualist perspective, it's more Promethean. The founders understood the historical context of being ruled over by imperial classes from Europe, and they bestowed the freedom, the Promethean freedom context through the Constitution, and said, here's the tools how to run a free country, free of with all the amendments, and be free from the tyrannists. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to not have your house raided and your assets seized, freedom of travel, freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. There's a whole embedded culture of freedom in the United States, especially in the early days. And the spiritualist Christian side, for example, that dominated was just more of a demographic factor that didn't really play into an overlord factor as it had in Europe, as it had in other places. So, yes, there is kind of a spiritual warfare going on, and it begins with the Promethean Constitution, but it plays out into a more of a battle of, can America continue to be free and embrace the Promethean Constitution, as Ron Paul. You mentioned like Ron Paul went to Congress and he's a values-driven guy. He doesn't shake or move because he gets to grace the halls of Congress or the Senate and doesn't get that sort of bloated head. And that's what the founders wanted. They wanted strong people who would stick close to the Constitution and stick close to these ideas, because they knew the cycles of Rome. These are the same guys who studied Rome over and over and over again in history classes, or the Greeks or something, and they said, no, you have to run close to these ideas of the Constitution and voluntary contracts and all these other things in order to stay free. And so the spiritualist idea, again, I think it's more in line with a happenstance as opposed to an actual structural entity. But that doesn't mean that there's not a subjective spiritualism in freedom. I think that, you know, if you choose to stand up for freedom, you can read into that however you want, and I think that also exists. What do you think?
Yeah, I think your points are spot on. I think there's a I mean, I'll say this. So, you know, 2,000 years ago, there was a guy that lived, and he, you know, he was maybe he was a carpenter, maybe he was you know, because there wasn't much wood around. Maybe he was a stonemason, and then at age 30, he starts talking, and then 3 years later, he's put to death, and then, and to me, and if you look at what's happening across the world, to me, that man's life is still sort of the center of what's going on. And he had basically two messages. He said, look, honor God and love one another. That was his thing. And when he showed up, you had, you know, the Jewish faith, which was really small. It was like 1% of the Roman Empire. But everyone there had to live under these rules. You know, there were like 613 or something rules, and that was the gateway to get to heaven or get to God or whatever. You had to do that. And he said, no, that's not the way it is. So there's I mean, one thing I really struggle with a lot of people is understanding the difference between voluntary anything and involuntary. And you've alluded to it very well. You know that you know, if you start parsing your life and say, am I doing this because I want to do this or because I'm being forced to do this? And it becomes a very gray area. There's an instinct, and I almost think this is like original sin. There's an instinct for people to want to run someone else's life. You know, like you said, the feudal lord. You know, it's feudal lord, to be a god in someone else's life, and it's a really bad thing when that happens. And even people that have that instinct have trouble acknowledging it. You know, I asked him, I said, why do you feel that there's virtue in taking money from one person and giving it to another when you have nothing to do with it? You know, virtue comes from the heart. Virtue is when you give something of yourself to someone else. But people see virtue in their political beliefs, you know, in terms of, you know, and the term I've used, I don't know the terms in Australia, but we have the list. It's progressivism, it's socialism, it's communism, it's fascism. You know, and I just kind of group them all together and call them state collectivism, right? And the word state implies by force. Because, you know, if you want to go live in a commune, which I've visited communes, I've never lived in one, but I think they're fantastic, as long as everyone has a voluntary right to leave the place if they don't like it. You know, my family is a little commune. You know, people can leave, and if they want to stay, they can stay. You know, so that's very different than communism, where you're being forced, you're being dictated, your education, your medical care, you know, and taking your wages. And I think, like, if you hire me to paint a room and you provide the paint, I provide my time and skill and effort to paint that room, and I charge you $100 for it, that's an even trade, right? I'm trading my skill and whatever for your money, and no third party has a right to participate in that. So, you know, the idea somehow, and this all came about, as you well know, with the Federal Reserve in 1913. Somehow, someone felt the right that they could take income. I mean, income tax is the dumbest thing in the world. You know, why disincentivize people to work? You know, when you work, they take it from you. You know, and people don't understand that America for 150 years had no income tax. You know, and we primarily lived off of excise tax, and the government was 3% of GDP. You know, now it's like half, and everyone goes, well, it needs to be bigger. It's not getting the job done. You know, it's really, really, you know, it's like another dimension that I'm living in.
Yeah, I find it really disturbing, especially when you listen to somebody like Ron Paul or Rand Paul. But because when you listen to them, what do? They constantly refer to the Constitution. That's the first thing that comes out of their mouth. It's kind of almost biblical. They say, "All right, hang on, what?" I have an opinion on this, but what does the Constitution say? Well, the Constitution, page 30, says this, and we should infer from this, and we should check with constitutional lawyers and stuff. And I was reading Bloomberg just on the train here to the office this morning, and it was like, does Trump have the constitutional authority to expand his own power, blah, blah, blah. But you know what I was thinking? More than that, I was thinking, that's the first time I've ever seen Bloomberg use the word constitution in a freaking news article. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly liberals and Democrats and Republicans, everybody's going, what is this strange book that exists here? I'd never heard of this thing, but let's have a look for answers to see if, so they only turn to it now when they're really desperate, everybody. So that's not what it's for. It's supposed to be a roadmap. It's supposed to be a guidebook that you turn to every day. And instead they're going, oh, well, there's this one point, there's this guy I don't like, he's the president. Let's actually see if he can, that's not what it's supposed to be. It's not a guidebook, in that way. It's supposed to be the law of the land. And it's just really sad to see, because I just thought, I haven't seen, CNN is talking about the Constitution, and I was just thinking, what, since when did they ever talk about the Constitution, and that's a really big, it's a really big red flag, that something is definitely not right in America when people are actually talking about the Constitution. I mean, it's really good in a way, but they're going to discover, that there's a lot of unconstitutional stuff that's going on, like the Federal Reserve, like the income tax, like warrantless searches. And, we talk about transhumanism on this show a lot. But that's because transhumanism is this idea of self-directed evolution. You got prosthetic limbs, you got people who are going to get brain implants, you got people who want to put chips in their arms and stuff. And is any of this stuff constitutional? Well, a lot of it is constitutional, but should it be enforced from a tyrannical overlord? And that's what I worry about. I say no. I say it's got to be voluntary, and it's got to be involved from a freedom-based aspect. If people want to do things with computers to their body, this has to come from a freedom aspect, as opposed to some dictator overlord, who puts in chips into people's brains or something and they control them. And I don't like that at all. I don't think that's fun. And it's funny to see people who advocate for that stuff change their mind very quickly when it's the people they don't like who would have the power and control. But those people are silly, because in an America where you have a rotating government, essentially, every 4 years it's supposed to turn over or whatever. A lot of these people say, oh, I would love Obama to control my brain or whatever, but hang on, I wouldn't want Trump. So then why would you allow that? Why would you tease that in? And that's the same thing. Ron Paul, that's the same thing. I stood up, in 2008 was, Obama never sent any of those bankers to jail. He never sent a single banker to jail.
No,
he bailed them out. Or maybe one. Yeah, some random Bernie Madoff, a fruitcake guy who. So this is so stupid, because you let them get away with one thing, and then you're going to let them get away with something else. So it's the continual erosion of the Constitution, erosion of liberties. The Patriot Act was never undone. The TSA still exists in an unconstitutional way. The war on marijuana, that thing shouldn't have even been a debate. This is so stupid. This is so stupid stuff, but people go along with it.
You're just depressed. That's all you're doing.
But people go along with it, and every time they let a government, because they say, oh, yeah, I like this guy, so let this guy have the power. But then when that guy hands over that power, nope, you shouldn't give that power away anyway. But what if the next person is worse than Obama or something? And, so all those liberals who were all saying, yay, let's give power to Obama, let's bomb US citizens overseas, this is a great idea. Then when Trump gets into power, they go, oh no, we shouldn't have given that power over, we shouldn't have advocated for that. But it's so stupid.
Yeah, I agree. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, I'm trying to train my own brain to think differently, but people have a tendency to have kind of photographic analysis or static analysis. They'll look at a situation and go, well, that situation's not so bad. They have trouble seeing the trend. They're saying, what's the trend? Where are we going? And that's kind of how this whole thing, I attended a freedom conference, a very small kind of exclusive freedom conference about a month ago, and my lab partner was. Do you know the book, The Creature of Jekyll Island?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
G. Edward Griffin was my guy next to me, and what we ended up leaving the conference saying, all we have to do is follow the Bill of Rights and enforce them in the Constitution. But the problem is you have to have a willing populace to do that. It's all being broken. Freedom of speech. There's censoring going on. I don't know if you've been censored, but it sounds like you could be. There's censoring. There's all these things that are so blatantly wrong and against the Constitution, and we just let it happen. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, it's sneaky tactics, and it's an erosion over time. And they always use emergencies, whether they're legitimate or not or whatever, as the lever, as the wedge, in order to pass unconstitutional acts and to continually erode liberties. And it's really sad to see. But Ron Paul is still out there. He's still alive. He's still making the Liberty Report. I watch it every day. And he's still standing up for freedom. And these are the types of talks that people need to rally around. These are the types of ideas that people.
Yeah. Well, Ron has he has an optimism that I struggle with. But we've known, what's really fascinating right now is we've known there's going to be a financial collapse. There has to be. You can't. It's impossible to pay off the debts that exist in the world. So we knew there was going to be a collapse coming, and then all of a sudden COVID-19 enters the picture. The collapse really hasn't happened yet, and the real important part of our economy is the bond market, and the bond market is still hanging in there, but it can't hang in there. So we still have all that excitement to look forward to. Ron thinks, he says, when this whole collapse happens, then something really great and freedom can come out. But it can also go the other way, where massive tyranny can come out too. So I'm not really sure, how to position, what can people like you and I do to try to see that freedom is what comes out of this. And you just don't know. I mean, I don't have great answers to that at all.
Yeah. And that's why we spend a lot of our time on this show talking to people about the new and emerging technologies, because that's where a lot of these tricks will happen, and that's where the future is with a lot of these tricky technologies. Talking about cognitive liberty, I mean, having cognitive liberty means you can think what you want, and you're able to not be punished for essentially wrong think. And this is in my estimation a good thing. I don't want to be punished for wrong think. We support campaign to stop killer robots, because you don't want killer robots running around enforcing some of this stuff. That's police are bad enough, but imagine robots. There's a lot of stuff in emerging technology that could be very negative to freedom and negative to people in general. And we try and find out what that stuff is and how we can navigate it around it in an ethical way. Okay. I find this extremely important.
So I have a question. Do you think the singularity has happened?
it hasn't happened, but there's definitely types of singularities that have happened. So the printing press is a type of singularity. The information age computer is a type of singularity. The internet is a type of singularity, but the Kurzweilian singularity is definitely not happened, and there's different projections from 2029 to 2045 of when that might happen.
A really smart friend of mine believes it has happened, and I said, "What's your evidence?" And he said, within the blockchain of Bitcoin, they see conversations, machine to machine conversations, and it's very obvious it wasn't just a programmer writing something. That, were not him saying this, I would completely say that it's bogus. But he said if the singularity has happened, the machines wouldn't let us know. So he thinks that he is one that thinks it's already happened. So I don't know if it has.
Yeah, well, like a conscious AI. It could be, and I guess that's the Turing test. That's a Turing test, I guess. That's that could be. Depends on its intelligence. I mean, how super intelligent is it? And what's its state of consciousness? Is it hyperconscious? Is it bottled up? Is it free to roam the internet? Is it in a lab somewhere? You've seen that movie Ex Machina, or whatever it's called. Is that that one gets out? That one goes from that facility in the middle of Nowheresville to out into the world. And so has that already happened? Is it? But I don't know, and I don't think it has, because well, I wouldn't know. I mean, it could have happened, but I don't see how. Listening to a lot of these AI experts, reading a lot of the stuff, I wouldn't say it's happened yet. I wouldn't say it would happen for another 5-10 years yet.
I tend to agree. If I was betting, I'd say yes, but this one fellow thinks it has. So what I'm super concerned. We have these pictures of people in food lines here. And I'm not talking about food to get into the store. I'm talking about like food banks that are running out of food. What's it like in Australia? Are you concerned about the food supply?
No, not at all. And I'm not worried about it for America either. In America, I've seen the same pictures. You've had the covered up versions of the food banks, which has been the welfare stamps. If you look at the Great Depression of the 1930s, people associate a depression with food lines, soup lines, or whatever. But that's been all covered up by welfare stamps and the distribution of stamps through the mail or whatever, however you guys receive those welfare stamps. But now it's gone into a more explicit version where I've seen in America, I've seen rows and rows of cars, just hundreds of people in their cars lined up all down the highways, going to get this food, and more generic standing in the lines as well. I've seen that as well, which look really long because of social distancing. So America is definitely going through some sort of trauma right now. You've got a minimum of 6 million unemployed. This is horrific, and there's no pent up demand. Trump talks either about a V-shaped recovery or a pent up demand. That's irrelevant. That's the stupidest argument I've ever heard. That's just him just making up stuff, because how economics works is I want to go to a meal today. I have to spend that money today in order to keep that money in circulation. If that money it goes down the line, that's opportunity cost in the past. So that doesn't make any sense. For pent-up demand would only mean consuming 10 iPhones somewhere in the future. A meal is already lost. You can't eat 10 meals in the future for all those restaurants and those hotels. You can't consume 10 unless you're really stupid, but you can't consume 10 hotel rooms at once, right? So there's no such thing as pent-up demand for the hospitality industry, for hotels, for all this other stuff, because these are time factor calculation that enhances the services around it, the lack of services around it. So I'm not surprised that America is going through food bank crisis right now. In Australia, no. In Australia, we have massive investments in our human capital, in our welfare system, to keep everyone in a job, not in a job so much to speak, but under staying at home under this stay at home. We've had almost. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Casual workers who fit into, it's almost 6 million casuals. Remember, our population is only 25 million, so it's a very, very low population, very small population. Our working population is around 14 million or less. It's not that high, and 6 million of those are getting paid $1,500 a fortnight to stay at home. And for most of those casuals, for example, those casuals, their income was much lower than that anyway. So actually, they're all making money off of this crisis. So it's kind of so it's kind of interesting. So for those 6 million people, they're actually now better off than they were before. The government is going into about $200 or $300 billion of debt to do it, which doesn't sound like anything in America. I know you guys talk in trillions and trillions. I mean, your stimulus package was $2 trillion, but for us, this is a record. Yeah, for us, this is a record. This is a record thing. But the bread lines, yeah, they're essentially there, but they're masked by.
I don't mean about people not having money. I mean about the supply chain. Like, we've had 3 meatpacking companies shut down because of COVID, and there's a huge problem since the restaurants aren't taking food. For some reason, it's a completely separate distribution chain. So a lot of the restaurant food is going bad. Like, they're killing animals, all kinds of things, because they can't quickly switch over to send it through the grocery side. So I'm just concerned that there's just not going to be enough food. I'm talking about 4 months away.
Australia is a net exporter of food. So because there's not that much international trade right now, we're actually just going to retain a lot of that food here and feed our population. We're even feeding our small population. We're still a net exporter of food. America is essentially the same. America has huge agricultural production capacity. They have big supply. You know, I find it funny with the toilet paper thing. Toilet papers have a really small supply chains. They're really safe, and you know, people hoard them anyway. I don't know why, but it's been a hilarious thing to watch. But toilet paper is one of the safest supply chains that there is. But no, America, you're the biggest producer of grains in the world. You have a huge, you know, the Mississippi Basin there is a massive food exporter for the whole world. You know, maybe some composition. You've got huge factory farms all over the America. You got lots of factory farms there in Texas, beef and chicken and geese, and you've got a lot. You've got good wine over there in Florida. I mean, not Florida, the other one, California. You've got great wine valleys over there. You've got peyote, so you've got drugs taken care of. You've got so like America has a really big like insulated food and supply chain distribution. Probably, yeah, you're going to lose some food. And I mean, the thing is with manufacturing, you know, COVID will slow the process a little bit in the short run, but in the medium to long run, in the next 5 years, you know, you're going to switch from manufacturing everything in China to manufacturing everything in Mexico. Everything's going to Mexico. It's going to race to Mexico like you never believe. You know, Mexico is going to boom from this. I don't think, you know, a lot of people talk about Vietnam. They talk about Thailand. They talk about the Philippines. Southeast Asia, I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. Vietnam's population demographic is not very strong. Thailand, again, you know, if there's another pandemic, why do you want to be an ocean away? You know, why does the American population want to be an ocean away? So I think it's all going to go to Mexico, arguably some to South America. Brazil is no longer the nation of the future. Brazil is starting to fall behind, and they're not taking COVID seriously, so they're gonna fall behind even further. And they're not a very big, food exporter anymore. They have one road. They have, where they're chopping down all that rainforest to build all those sugarcane and palm oil and whatever else they're building down there. They have one national highway that can be blown up, and then that stops all the export. So, Brazil is not, I don't think America wants to invest in Brazil. But yeah, I think America is fine in terms of its production chain. I think it would have been. I think another thing is like the other thing is like the tariff war between Gigi and Trump. So the Chinese American tariff war was actually beautiful in the fact that being early on the game, it shifted some of that manufacturing out of China anyway, and it started distributing it before this thing happened. Without that, you would have been even more reliant on China. So, that's a blessing in disguise for America there. You've got more manufacturing.
Where do you think China is right now?
Beg your pardon?
Where do you think China is right now?
China?
In terms of production?
Oh, I think that the MIC, the manufacturing index is like they're up to like 60% or 80% or something. It's rising. It's rising. Wuhan is back online. It was really Shenzhen and some of these other coastal communities that you really had to worry about. Wuhan is not the biggest manufacturing corridor in China, but it is important for internal distribution. But yeah. China is definitely coming back online now, but I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to export to where? I mean, America is not receiving goods right now, and they don't want to like send people back and forth because they get reinfected, right? So China is and Trump hasn't budged. Using Robert Lighthizer, the trade representative, he hasn't budged on the the tariff war. So China is expanding into weakness. It's expanding to America into a tariff barrier. So I don't know. China's China, and it's not going to be the big engine of growth that I think a lot of people are considering. But in terms of food security, yeah, America is definitely one of the most food secure nations on the world. Australia is pretty food secure. Europe is sort of food secure. They rely on a lot of agricultural subsidies in order to maintain food security, which which they have done. Maybe that's going to pay off now. I mean, the Schengen zone is shut down, which will delay goods and services going between the different European countries, and Brexit is still happening, which is good for the UK because it takes them out of a lot of the pressures that's going on in Italy and stuff. But Europe should be okay in terms of some food security as well. Russia, some food security as well. They've got a huge grain farms down there, but they are but yeah, I think America should be okay. But yeah, if there's going to be like local disruptions to meat and poultry and stuff, I mean, that's understandable. Maybe some farms will go offline. Maybe there'll be different local problems. But on the aggregate, I don't see why Americans, Walmart is going to keep getting food. I don't really see the problem.
Yeah, I mean the stores here, just anecdotally, the grocery stores are running limited hours. There aren't a lot of people in the stores, and the shelves are a little sketchy. I mean, there's a lot of missing product, and maybe they'll get their hands around it at some point. But it's if you don't have people working. It's hard to know along the. Have you ever heard the story of the banana, where you ask someone, if you go to your grocery and there's a banana there, and say how many people did it take for that banana to get in the grocery? Do you know the answer?
Well, don't all your bananas come from just below you there in what's it called? Yeah, how many people?
So how many people would you guess?
Probably like 40 or something. It's probably crazy because you need to grow them and pick them and pack them and.
Yeah, well, it's a trick question because so let's just say a guy climbed up a tree in some place where they grow bananas, and he chopped it down. Well, he used a knife to chop it down, and then somebody had to make that knife, and then in the place that made the knife had to get steel from somewhere. So it's just an example of how complicated the whole world is in terms of trying to deliver something. And then a guy has to drive a truck there. He picks up the bananas. He has to drive a truck on the road. Someone had to build the road. Someone had to build the truck. Someone had to provide the fuel. And the answer is 1 million. It took 1 million people to get that one banana into the place. So we have the world is so integrated and so complicated that, there's concern in terms of supply chain. If people shut down businesses because of Corona, and that's a critical component of getting something to the store, the whole thing breaks down. I mean, I think our supply chain is much more fragile than people give it credit for. And the politicians right now are just shutting things down kind of willy-nilly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a famous Milton Friedman pencil. It's a pencil. It's a pencil thing that he said. How do we? Because someone's going to make the graphene, and that is a really, really good example of how free markets operate in a global system. And they create lots and lots of fragility. When there's a pandemic or a war or some other existential threat that can disrupt the supply chain. In Australia, the stores are pretty much back to full. Like in terms of, we have good amount of food security, like I said, stores and wearing down their bank accounts on storing up on different things.
What about restaurants? Are the restaurants open?
No, the restaurants are still shut. There's a certain criteria of restaurants that are allowed to operate, and it's
China. So China opened up, I guess. They say 60%. Did COVID become less contagious? I mean, something doesn't make sense. That if one person could infect 1,000 at one event, how is it not just continuing to infect people? I think that someone said to get the herd immunity, you have to be at about 60%. The U.S., by their statistics, is 1%. Maybe we're really 5% or something. But we have a long way to go before we have herd immunity. Did China get herd immunity, or did they figure out something they're not telling us on how to keep people from getting too sick from it? I mean, how were they able to open?
From what I understand is, they locked down Wuhan, and they locked very authoritarian, in a very authoritarian nature, kept everyone inside, to the point of welding people into their houses, welding their doors shut, which was terrifying in a way. So there was a very authoritarian, aggressive approach, and then they tested everybody, and they've eliminated every source that they can find, and then they haven't let anyone back into the country that has the disease. So they've basically just eliminated it from the country. Now, a lot of the statistics are arguable. If you see the infection rates in other countries, if you see the amount of deaths in other countries, if you see the rate of recovery in other countries, and if you know anything about how the Chinese government, the Bureau, decides to do their statistics from anything, from the economy, the amount of anything that they do, they always fudge the numbers. So, you could add a zero on the end of all of those numbers. I have no idea, and I don't think anybody does have an idea about the actual statistics. And it's, and that's the thing about America, in the WTO, is like anywhere before the Chinese ascended to the WTO was taking a risk. It was a bet on China. But after they ascended to the WTO, they should have played by the rules. They should have given us good statistics. They should play by the rules of the WHO. They should play by the rules. But, we don't trust anything they say. We don't trust the stats, and we can't get a real number, and which means that puts everybody else in the region and themselves at risk. So, so they are opening up. They're going back and stuff like that, but at what cost? At what cost? And is the statistics coming out of China an accurate reflection so that we get a proper view in our countries of what to do? And the three standouts have been, I guess, Taiwan, which hasn't even gone into any sort of lockdown, and they've managed it. Korea has done the same thing. Japan has done fairly well at managing the crisis. It's really been Western countries that have gone into full lockdown that have mismanaged it, like Italy, Germany seems to be mismanaging it. UK, US is struggling. We've done okay here. New Zealand has done okay. Iran is, I don't know what's going on in Iran. I don't know what's going on in Afghanistan or Iraq. It seems to be out of control, crazy. I don't really know. But yeah, what are the statistics out of China? Why are they opening up? What's the real numbers? All that. I don't know. And I don't think anybody really does know. And you can't send people to inspect right now. There's a few journalists who are stuck there, sort of nosing around, but that doesn't give you an overall picture. It's kind of a messed up scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. So in the abstract, China goes and they self-isolate everybody. So that's what the West does. And now China supposedly has opened up. And so that's what the West is going to do. And to me, it's all on kind of funny information on what is exactly happening. Why are we doing this? Something doesn't sound like you're alluding to. We're not getting a clear picture on what's happening. I had heard before they shut down Wuhan, like 5.5 million people just bolted, and supposedly now they're saying you can catch this thing at 23 feet. And it will live for 17 days. I mean, it's got all this crazy stuff that, there seems to be an inevitability that we're all going to get this, or at least half of us are going to get this until the herd immunity comes in. And the only reason to keep isolating is so we don't overwhelm the healthcare system.
That's the standard argument. And, and it kind of does make sense because it means people with regular diseases, will be able to fight those diseases and manage those diseases. Okay. All right. I mean, I don't know. But to me, the economics of it is kind of strange too, because like you said, we're going into some sort of depression now, and won't like the starvation and the civil disorder and everything else that comes out of this be more harmful than I don't know. And, maybe it was going to be one of those diseases that just rips through the entire population and leaves hundreds of millions of people. And if that's the case, then maybe we are doing the right thing. But again, China doesn't seem to indicate that's what was going to happen. I don't know. Maybe there's an alien invasion and we're not allowed to go outside and watch it. I don't know.
That's right. One little number thing I ran we watch Drudge here a lot. I don't know if that's smart or not, but Drudge had a headline that 80,000 people were going to die. And so in 4 months. So it turns out in America, 7,500 people a day die just normally. And so you multiply 7,500 by 120 days, and it's about 900,000. Of course, 80,000 is maybe, I don't know. It's like 9% of 900,000. So, and what we know for sure is if someone dies here of whatever they die of, if they happen to have COVID, and this test is not accurate. I mean, the test is maybe, it gives a lot of false positives. If they die of a heart attack or diabetes or whatever, they'll flag it as a COVID. So we don't even really know here what's happening. I know for sure some people are dying horrible deaths. I'm saying the virus is real. I believe the virus is very real, but there's something funny about it.
I think it's in the broader context of the virus is definitely real. I wouldn't argue with that. I think people are dying. I just think it's the broader context of, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that's what they're doing. I think, because like if you know anything about central banking or the government, the central bankers have been trying to get inflation into the system. And that's why you see quantitative easing. That's why you see helicopter money. That's why you see not helicopter money, but you see a lot of quantitative easing trying to get that inflation into the system and lowering of the interest rates and everything else to try and get that economic growth. And the IMF, the World Bank, all the governments have been saying, no, we need fiscal stimulus. We need fiscal stimulus. We need to. So Trump's been saying, let's get this central bank rate down to zero. And since it went to zero, essentially that's free money for the whole world. So the whole world has said, all right, we've got this COVID stuff. Let's all borrow at 0%. Let's get some free money from the Fed, and let's all just spend like crazy. And I think like the governments are
Exactly what's
probably
happening. You're right.
yeah, they're all running fiscal deficits now at massive. I mean, America spent $2 trillion. We spent $300 billion. Governments all around the world are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on free, cheap money. So, you know, I think it's just like in the context of don't let a good crisis go to waste. And if this is a way to get that fiscal stimulus into the system, it's because it's Keynesian, right? I mean, we live in it doesn't make sense to you or me because we're not Keynesians, and like, but it makes sense in the Keynesian mind. And you know, it's this damage, it's this broken window fallacy that, you know, oh, if you smash a few windows, you'll see some automatic economic rejuvenation because they don't see unseen benefits. So maybe to people like you and me, and this is what I've been finding with people who understand the broken window fallacy versus Keynesians, because a lot of Keynesians I talk to say, this is great, the government's spending big, everybody's at home, which means there'll be pent-up demand, which means the economy is going to roar in the next, but they're not, that's a very simplistic Keynesian version of economics, and you're not really looking at the opportunity cost of all of the broken opportunity that's you know, because of, you know, broken window fallacy. So, you know, don't let an opportunity go to waste. I think that's what's going on.
There's two things. You know these points, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir. But one thing that people don't understand is that, you know, the money, like the $6 trillion, which is just, you know, that's $60,000 per family in the United States, and this is a country that 74% of us live paycheck to paycheck. So $60,000 is a dramatic amount of money, and if they type it in a ledger, you know, it isn't money like the Federal Reserve has saved up over time or taxed or whatever. This is literally just typing into a ledger an amount that shows up in bank accounts around the world, however they decide to distribute it. The other thing that people are very slow to understand is it's a closed system. So it's a method of taxation. You know, as soon as they create $6 trillion, it comes out of their wages, it comes out of their wealth that they've saved. All that in the form of inflation decreases the value of the lifestyle that they've had. And we've seen in my lifetime, we've seen the American lifestyle go down the tubes. You have two people working full-time jobs, you know, trying, you know, and not saving a darn thing. So it's a very, very insidious and horrible system that we live under, and you know, it's very weird. To talk to people, like we're doing the thing of, it's not $1,500 per fortnight. It's like $1,500 per month is what we're doing, and it's such a small percentage of what they have now borrowed. Yeah, we have an innumerate society, I think, by plan, and people just don't understand money.
Which, you know, is what Henry Ford or somebody said, if there'd be a revolution in the morning.
Thank you.
All right, you stay safe. You stay away from COVID, actually, regardless of what, you know, just stay away. So, you know, don't get that stuff. But anyway, you stay safe, and thank you very much for coming on this episode of Detonation, and thanks to everyone who's keeping Detonation alive. And also, say hi to everyone for me. It's been fantastic.
Okay, take care. Bye.
All right. Thank you. That's Detonation.